The Russians only have 2 million troops that can play that role. And they are irreplaceable, and once they are deployed, that is it. Russia is done. It is Russia's last war. This V, this wedge, is populated Russia. It is the part of Russia where it's not so cold that your nose will freeze off in early October. Late October, you're screwed, but early October, you're fine. Now, this orange color here, that's roughly the population density of eastern Nebraska if you melon scoop out Lincoln and Omaha. So you do have neighbors. You will not see them every day. That's populated Russia. On the shoulders, it gets a little less encouraging. So same view, but this is a combined climate and economic map. So the green, that's the Russian wheat belt. That's where everybody lives. The blue, tundra and taigai, nobody lives there. The yellow, desert, nobody lives there. You technically could survive in the beige, but it's not pleasant. When the Russians look at this map, they really hate what they see, because they see a chunk of territory that cannot be defended. They look at it from the point of view of these red hashes. These are the physical boundaries that you can't drive a tank through, or the Mongolians can't horde through. From the Russian point of view, the only way that they can get security is if they can put permanent massed formations in these corridors, the access points to the Russian heartland. When the Soviet Union existed, they controlled all 9 of those access points. It was the most secure the Russian ethnicity had ever been in its existence. When the Soviet Union collapsed and we were left with rump Russia, they went from 9 to 1. In 2007, when the Russians invaded Georgia, they went from 1 to 2. In 2014, when they took Crimea, they went from 2 to 3. With the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, with the new troops that are there, they went from 3 to 4. They're hoping that the situation in Kazakhstan will stabilize to their benefit, which would take them from 4 to 5. And if they can take Ukraine in its entirety, they would go from 5 to 7. There's a method to the madness. Also means that the Russians can't stop. As Catherine the Great said, the only way that Russia can protect her borders is to expand them. This is the Russian demography, and we're assuming here that the Russians are not lying about the numbers, and they lie about all their numbers. So, this bulge down here probably is not as big as it looks, because back in 2014, they just found 8 million children that they didn't have in the previous year's census. But here's the part that really matters. This is the generation that was born in the 1990s and early 2000s. The Cold War collapse. That's draftable age. Yes, the Russians can probably take the country with 130,000 troops, take Ukraine. But they can't hold it. You guys know that from the experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Occupying's not easy when the population doesn't want you there. It's a country of 45 million people. That's Iraq plus Afghanistan. And unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, where the population concentrations were pretty tight, Ukraine is farmland. Not possible with 130,000 troops. You're talking 2 million troops. The Russians only have 2 million troops that can play that role. And they are irreplaceable, and once they are deployed, that is it. Russia is done. It is Russia's last war. It's an open question in the United States whether it's better to just let them die over the long term, which they will, or lock them down in a war that is endless, which it would. From the American point of view, these are both equally viable options. Russia and Belarus are the world's second and 4th largest supplier of potash. Nitrogen fertilizer is disappearing because of what's going on in energy markets. Phosphate fertilizer is disappearing because of what's going on in China. Potash fertilizer globally has a shortage as well. Yes, rifles are an industrial technology, but so is fertilizer. And if you remove all 3 types of fertilizer at the same time, this world is over. Now, the US will be fine. We either produce it ourselves or get stuff we need from Canada. But the rest of the world, the technical term is fucked. So let's talk about where it hurts most. Here's Africa in 1950. This is a crop concentration map. The pink and the blue are areas where roughly 1/3 or less of the land is under cultivation. And in a pre-industrial system, this is what you would expect. We don't have this experience in the American Midwest. Our land is too good. But in every other part of the world, most of the lands are subpar. And it takes value-added inputs in order to make them productive. Fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, equipment, finance, takes it all. All of those are industrial technologies. And with 50 years of access to those technologies, this is what Africa became. Over 5 decades, their output increased by a factor of 5. It's one of the great successes of the globalized order. Subpar lands, once you apply the technology, have explosive increases, which means if you take away the inputs, they have explosive decreases. This is where the world's wheat comes from. The beige are the net exporters, the red are the net importers. The reason I'm putting this up is because of the Russians. The last time the Russians mucked with export markets for wheat and imports, it was 2010. They had a very dry season in Siberia and a lot of their wheat fields burned. On top of the previous year where it had been a wet year and they had locusts. I mean, Russia's very good at plagues. Anyway, in 2010 they had export restrictions that had the net effect, by removing a certain percentage of global production from the market, of doubling wheat prices globally. It tripled in the countries where they were usually the primary supplier, particularly the Middle East. We know the outcome of that is the Arab Spring. And that's nothing compared to the scale of what we're seeing already this year. In fact, even if things with China and Russia and energy went away today, it's probably too late to get the fertilizer created, processed, and distributed before planting season in the Northern Hemisphere. The wars in Europe that erupted that impacted food production and distribution. The Eastern Hemisphere agricultural zones are, as a rule, subpar, and when you mess up the input stream, things get nasty fast. For North America, the Midwest is not normal. It rains. It's on a water network for distribution. Nobody else can do that. So yeah, we're looking at a turning of history, but it's turning back. This is my favorite map of all time. So this takes everything that I do in manufacturing and military strategy and energy and agronomics and puts it in one graphic. The countries in the blue in a deglobalized world are the ones that rule the future. They've got everything that they need locally. They're going to do very, very well. They will try to screw it up. They will fail. The green, looking pretty good, more or less where they are now. Yellow and brown is where things fall apart. Now, the yellows have something going for them. Maybe they're self-sufficient in food or energy, or they have a particularly unified population that doesn't mind a few hardships here and there. They'll suffer through. The browns can't. The browns are utterly dependent upon the shape of the world as it is today, as it is maintained by the Americans, and they lack the capacity to impose a replacement system even in their own neighborhoods. And then the reds are the failed states. I am not worried about managing or repulsing a Chinese or a Russian war of expansion. If the Chinese or the Russians move, it's their end. And part of me is kind of looking forward to that. I am worried about managing wars of collapse and wars of after effects as these major powers that have thrived in recent decades because of the American strategic overwatch, because they collapse under their own weight. That's my concern.